Hi, and welcome to HROL, Harsh Realities of Life. This episode is called Living Money, Dying God, and True Fear. This is Part 2, Dying God. I know this episode is, without a doubt, going to ruffle some feathers, and it will be very difficult for some people to hear. So I would like to start by saying, I do actually believe in God, or a supreme creator. I am in no way trying to upset, offend, or challenge anybody or their religious beliefs. With all that being said, what do I mean by dying God? Well, as I discussed in Part 1, the most important thing you should prioritize whilst living is money, hence its title, Living Money. But on the flip side, from the moment we are born and take our first breath, every second, minute, and hour that passes brings us closer to our inevitable demise. So in essence, we are living, but it would still be accurate to say we are also dying. Hence Part 2's title, Dying God. As while we are dying, the most important thing we should prioritize is God. Let's jump right in. What is God? Well, if I ask my trusted friend Google, one search result suggests this answer, and I quote, God is often conceived as the greatest entity in existence. God is often believed to be the cause of all things, and so is seen as the creator, sustainer, and ruler of the universe. God is often thought of as incorporeal and independent of the material creation, while pantheism holds that God is the universe itself. End quote. I chose to use this quote because if you pay close attention to the wording, it clearly uses suggestive phrases such as, God is often conceived as. The reason for this is simple, as right up to this present day, there is no tangible proof of God's existence, and I know it may be hard to hear, but the truth is, God can also be explained as just a concept or a theory, as nobody on planet Earth has undeniable evidence that God exists, even if you yourself passed away on the operating table for 3 minutes and were brought back to life, and in that time you saw and spoke to God, you will still face the challenge of convincing the rest of the world that what you witnessed really occurred, and without proof, who would believe you? But as I previously stated, I do believe in God, and also feel I have witnessed what can only be described as divine intervention, meaning an indescribable event that can only be explained by saying a divine entity outside of our realm of possibility has intervened. And I would like to take a moment to detail that experience. It happened at a time in my life when I was in between employment and finding it very difficult to keep up with paying my bills. Needless to say, I was being threatened with legal actions to be taken out against me if I could not pay. And eventually the threats became real. And my electric company disconnected my power, leaving me with no lights, television, refrigerator, etc. After a day or so, living off of candle lights and torches, I became understandably frustrated and angry. With not much else to do, I sat down and picked up a book that was given to me by my grandmother many years prior. The book was called My Book of Bible Stories. I turned to a random page and began to read. The story I was reading was about a man called Job. He was a very wealthy and important man, a prince of sorts, and he was also a very religious man, praising and worshiping God, always giving thanks for the happy and prosperous life which he lived. The story then details that the devil approached God and states that Job only gives praise and worship because of the prosperous life that he lives, and suggests that if his prosperity was to be taken away, he would then turn away from God and no longer continue to serve him. God disagrees, but does agree to put Job to the test. For the next few years, Job faces hardships and loses everything he holds dear. He lost his family, his children, and his fortune, and becoming what we would call today a homeless person. He does at times become frustrated and asks God why he would allow his faithful servant to be subjected to such horrendous treatment. But he never turns his back on God and still continues to give God praise, regardless that he is going through such hardships. In the end, because of his strength and faithfulness, God blesses Job once again and he ends up receiving twice as much as he had before. When I came to the end of the story, I closed the book and felt an overwhelming feeling of emotion. It didn't matter to me if I thought the story was true or false. What mattered was how the story made me feel. I felt like I was not being subjected to half the trauma that I could be facing, and I also started to consider the fact that my situation wasn't that bad. And just like that, all the lights in my house suddenly turned on. I couldn't believe it. I grabbed my television remote control and pressed the power button, and on it came. But how and why? I thought. I hadn't made any payments or even tried to contact the company, being as I still had not come up with the money to pay. Even if this was just a coincidence or some law that prohibits companies from leaving you without power, the fact that it happened in that precise moment had me convinced that something out of this world had touched me. I tried to hold on to this feeling and remember that moment for as long as I possibly could. But something keeps pulling me away. It is the same thing that had me feeling lost and frustrated in the first place, and one of the things that was taken away from Job. Of course, I am talking about money. I guess this is where the phrase, money is the root to all evil, derived from. Look at it this way. Most religious texts suggest that life is just one big test that will determine where our soul will go when we die. If this is true, then life is the most important test you will ever encounter. But the average person has no time to think or reflect on that notion. Instead, we are forced to scramble around using every hour of every waking day, trying to find a way to pay our taxes, our rent, our car notes, our children's school tuitions, all along not paying attention to the fact that we are also dying and risking our souls. I hope by now you are paying attention and listening to the words, as words, contracts, and legal jargon are all tactics used to trick and entrap you. I just stated that we are forced to scramble around to find money, but that statement is untrue. The truth is, you are not forced to do anything. You always have a choice. Choices are a human being's superpower. Whatever happens to you in your life, good or bad, all occurs from the choices we make. If you want to push a human being into a corner, all you have to do is limit their choices and decision-making abilities, therefore turning their free will into your will. For instance, if you place someone into a poor economic environment, they will become desperate because of their limited options. If they begin to rob, steal, and hurt people, it was obviously their circumstances that brought them to make drastic decisions. But they themselves made the decision and took the actions, leaving them to face the consequences, not only from the law, but now possibly also from God. To take a deeper look into this ideology, we will have to start at the beginning, or more appropriately, in this case, the Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and along with many other creations, God created a man called Adam and a woman called Eve, and allowed them to live in a utopia or paradise called the Garden of Eden. And in order for them to not be mindless robots, loving and blindly obeying, they were given free will and the ability to make choices, with only one rule, which was, do not eat from the tree in the middle of the garden, which is the tree of knowledge. But one of God's other creations, an angel called Lucifer, became jealous of the fact that Adam and Eve were given so much free will and decided to trick or tempt Adam and Eve into disobeying God by appearing in the form of a snake or serpent and assuring them that eating from the forbidden tree was in fact a trick from God, and that eating from this forbidden tree of knowledge would allow them to be as wise and powerful as God himself. They did eat from the tree, and even though they were clearly coerced and manipulated, the fact is they were not forced, meaning they did have a choice. And being that choice meant they had broken the one rule they had been given and disobeyed God. They were exiled from the paradise Garden of Eden, thus beginning the journey, experience, and test that we call life today. There are much more layers and theories that I can and will touch on in later documentaries, so please like, subscribe, and share in order to stay up to date and in tuned. But for now, let's move on. I am fully aware that I'm just skimming the surface of the creation story, But for this episode, I just want to focus on the most relevant part, which in my opinion is that word again, choice. If this creation narrative is anything to go by, it seems that all God wants from us is that we love and obey Him, but not because we are forced to do so, but through our own free will and choice. But in my opinion, the same blessing of free will seems to also be our biggest downfall. If you look in the case of Adam and Eve, choice was their greatest blessing, so much so that it made Lucifer jealous. If they chose to obey, they would have continued to live and prosper in paradise. But even though they were manipulated, the fact is that they were not forced and still had a choice, which inherently means they were still to blame, showing how important it is to take huge amounts of consideration before making our choices. It is said that God is all loving and merciful, intending for us to love our neighbors and turn the other cheek when wronged. But as I discussed in part 1, a capitalistic system is dog-eat-dog, a survival of the fittest system, which is already a clear contradiction. As if you wanted to fully love, obey, and follow God, it seems you will obviously be poor, as being loving and merciful are not traits that will take you very far in a capitalistic system. So, does God want me to be poor and suffer in order to follow? This can't be the case, and I don't believe it to be true. Look at it this way. If God is the architect and originator of all creation, God is the past, the present, and the future, and also a master mathematician. That would mean that when choice was created for human beings, God in this equation is the representation of the right choice. But without Lucifer, what would be the representation of wrongdoing or the wrong choice? Which there clearly needs to be, or how else would Adam, Eve, or Job been able to prove themselves or their loyalty? I am not saying God needs Lucifer. What I am saying is God, being a master mathematician, would have anticipated Lucifer's possibility long before he ever came to be. In sorts similar to Neo, the character from the movie The Matrix. This means Lucifer is not and cannot be independent, a surprise, or an entity out of God's control. If we look at that as just a metaphor, an idea, or a theory, I would like you to look at today's world in the same way. Being that you are Adam or Eve, and what would be Lucifer in the Garden of Eden, in today's world that would be represented by the system. The system is the serpent, distracting you from the fact that you already live in paradise and tempting you with the allure of money and power beyond your wildest dreams. You could have a mansion with maids and servants, a private plane and fast cars, and all you have to do is chase the carrot on the stick, metaphorically biting the apple and forgetting about God. I am not saying that you should forget about money either. That would be naive. I am saying strive to be like the story of Job, a person who makes the right choices with or without being prosperous. Know who you are and who you represent. Adam and Eve had everything they could possibly want or need, but by allowing themselves into believing they could have more, they ended up with nothing. As I said in part 1, 99% of human beings will not make it to be rich beyond their wildest dreams. That is not realistic, being that there is clearly not enough currency in existence to allow that to happen. It is a trick or distraction tactic used to limit your choices and decision-making abilities, leaving you instead to end up without money and without God, unknowingly, all by your own choice. In summary, is God the most important thing to prioritize, for lack of better terms, whilst dying? Yes, 100%. In my opinion, there is nothing more important.